Hi, good morning. Is it still morning? It doesn't feel morning to me. I had to wake up at 5:30 this morning to catch my flight because I missed my connecting flight last night. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about my perspective on change management and my experience with change management. And as Nigel said, I am an anthropologist, a business anthropologist, as I like to call myself, because I don't really feel like an anthropologist going into Africa or Alaska and doing research there, because I think there's a lot of research to be done in organizations themselves. Which means that I kind of also am a chameleon because I do fit into the corporate world, but I also fit into the anthropology world. And that's also a little bit what we're going to talk about today. But before we do that, I have a quick question for you guys. How many of you, either today or for a client event, actively thinks about what they're going to wear, what clothes they're going to wear? Just a raise of hands. Yeah, okay, and there's a gender split here, by the way. So maybe it's just a female thing. But what I actually wanted to wear today was a bright pink pants and a white shirt with pink letters. And you know why? Because that makes me feel energized. And I think a lot of us think about what we want to wear because it makes us feel a certain way and it empowers us to act in a certain way, right? So I wore my comfy clothes because I had to catch a flight, and I can tell you my silk pink pants would not have survived the flight this morning. So I had to change plans. But our environments aren't that much different, right? The built environment is not just a physical space, but it's a place that it carries culture. It carries who you are. It shows your guests who you are. But it also can energize you and it can drain you. It has a lot of impact on who we are and how we feel and how we act and what behaviors we show. So we have to think about the physical space as more just a physical space, but around everything that it carries with it. And to do a little bit of an introduction before I go into the change management bit, we've done a research called What Occupiers Want. It's available on our website from Cushman and Wakefield. And it is a survey that we've sent out through corporate real estate managers, through Coronet. And it every year shows us kind of the trends, what's happening, what way are companies going into. And a lot of talk has been, of course, about hybrid working and the impact of hybrid working on our environments. So before I go into change management and why that's important, let's just for a moment stand still to understand what's happened in the last couple of years. And the main thing that we're hearing, and you hear it, of course, everybody talks about it, our spaces are changing, but is it really? And we can actually see that our CRE managers have filled in the survey that actually the space has gone from a focus on individual work to a focus on collaborative work. And we see that the purpose of the office is around socialization, around people, about collaboration, bringing people together. And that has an impact on what we're seeing in the environment. So that means that the types of spaces that we're seeing is different. We're not walking into an office where there are, I don't know how many individual desks where you see people working, but you see more collaborative spaces. You see more support facilities, and there's a really different vibe to the office environment. And the reason that I'm saying that, and I wanted to start with that, is because I want you to understand what that does to us, because it's not just a physical change, it is a cultural change that we're going through. And when we look at culture and we look at what is enabled in that environment, we have a couple of things that we see explicitly in the environment, and we have a couple of things that we see through a tacit lens. And so the explicit one is quite evident, right? When you walk into a space, there's a branding. You hear or you see the company brand, you see the colors, you feel like you're a part of a certain organization when you walk in. At least I hope so, and if not, then they're also welcome to come to us to ask for advice, or anyone probably in this room. The idea is that you have your identity and you have your image. I found this super interesting because when I was studying anthropology, I did not know I was going to go into business anthropology, by the way. I'm probably the only one from my class who did. I did realize I didn't want to go into different national cultures. And someone triggered me by saying what impact a building can have on who you are or how you feel in an environment, what the culture says. So they were talking about buildings that have a lot of glass facades, that have a lot of glass within the space, and that they become very transparent. So when I was doing my thesis for my study, I chose to do that at a governmental organization in the Netherlands. I don't know how your governmental organizations are here. I think they're a little bit more modern if I look at the buildings. But in the Netherlands, a governmental organization, it's a hallway with private offices. And it has maybe 3 desks or 4 desks at max, but it's all very private and siloed. And I did a research on collaboration and how people were finding each other in the space, and we found that people were actually not connecting. They were actively not looking each other up in space. They were actually going into their offices and very self-focused. I gave an advice on that in my master thesis. They did not appreciate that, by the way, from a 24-year-old, I can tell you that. I would love to go back and advise them. I'm a little bit afraid now. But it just shows that what you do in the office matters. And why it matters is because what it does, it sets your norms and behaviors. So when you go into an office space that is focused on the individual, your behaviors will be individualistic. When you go into an office that focuses on collaboration, then it supports those types of behaviors. And a friend of mine who works for a Swiss bank has launched a pilot space in his bank, and it's fully modular. Everything is movable, and it's quite transparent. It's not glass, it's all wood, but you can see through the different aspects of the space. And he has a collective kind of community space in the middle. And what is really awesome about that space is that he just put up a bulletin board, and he didn't even actually put in a kitchen, but it was kitchen-y-like because it was modular. You couldn't really connect anything. But it became the place where people would have pie contests. So they would bake pies and they would compare it to each other. And he had 0 effort in that. And through the bulletin board, they started sharing stuff with each other. And then they put in just a bucket of Lego. And people started building with the Lego. And you saw that a lot of creativity happen. And that was a leap of faith for that company, especially considering, bank companies are not the most progressive. But it showed that by changing the environment, you change the behaviors and the norms that are lying underneath. And you also change the values that you have underneath that. So you can very highly value the individual in an individual environment, but if you open that up, then you're implicitly saying that you don't value the individual aspect of working as much as that you do the collaborative. So it has a value underneath that we need to focus on. So then why change management, right? One second, I want to go back to this slide for 1 second, because I think the important thing is if you look at these levels and you think about who's going to be the most impacted by the changing environment. Is that going to be the end user? Is that going to be the one that just joined the company? Probably not, because they just joined. So their norms and behaviors and their value system hasn't been as set as people that have been with the organization for a longer period of time. The actual group that's going to be impacted the most is the executive level. Because if you change this, you're going to change their entire system that they value themselves by. You're going to impact hierarchy. If you change from an individual to a collaborative setting, you're going to impact implicit hierarchy systems in your organization. Your private office is not going to be the visual aspect of power anymore. It's going to maybe become your lease car. That's at least what I say from a corporate real estate perspective. It's usually the car you drive now. So this is a very important level, right? And then you have the middle managers. Those are also, they have the feeling that they're losing control because they used to know where all their people were and they could walk into a room and they could see that they're working. But now they have to do that in a very different way. And maybe the way that they're working is probably a little bit different. And your middle management has to relearn how to actually manage a more collaborative work style. So that has a major impact. While the individual worker who used to be individual now comes in, that change it's going to have it's going to have an emotional part to it, but it's not as set in its patterns as the more senior people in an organization. So why change management? 70% of change programs fail to achieve their goals. So that's not a positive note to start on. So why even do it then if 70% fails? I can tell you from the pro-side perspective that the number one reason change programs fail is because there's no executive sponsorship. So that's the number one reason that these 70% of change programs fail. Executive leadership, they think modern work environment, great, let's do it. We're going to attract talent and it's going to be fantastic. But then when it comes to the actual change, then there's a lot of hesitance, like, well, but I don't want to lose my own private office. And I don't want to have people working from home or working in a hybrid setting because I don't know where they'll be. You have to have an executive sponsor. You have to have someone who sponsors your program and make sure that, you know, that individuals feel that it's being supported from top to bottom. It's cost $900 billion a year. That's an estimate. And it's just there to make you think, wow, I cannot prove that. It's probably more technical. But still, if you have 70% of your change programs failing and you have an entire new work environment and it's not being used, that's going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact on your productivity. It's going to have an impact on your efficiency of your spatial use. So that has a massive impact. And then the last one, 56 of change programs that do not use change management, so that are not intentional, are behind schedule, and 37% are over budget, which was, by the way, my master thesis within the government, because the government tends to do that. They tend to say it's going to take a year, and then they take 5 years. And they tend to multiply what they spend by like 5 to 10. It's insane. So if you don't intentionally manage that change, that has an impact on your timeline. It has an impact on your budget. So a little bit about why change management, right? We talked about this. There's a lower productivity. You'll encompass passive or active resistance. You'll get that in a change program as well, but still you'll be able to manage it. You'll be able to strategically approach it. A lot of these things are evident, right? It's not only what you see up front, but it's also the impact that you have in like a second tier. So by people not feeling comfortable in their environment, they'll be less productive. Or they might call in sick. Or managers that are frustrated don't know how to manage their people anymore. And therefore also the output, what their team is producing, is going to be less as well. And you'll have a higher turnover rate. And you might actually have a higher turnover rate at your management and executive level, because those are the most difficult to train and to take along on this journey. So then, how do we signal sabotage behavior? I love this. There's a Dutch anthropologist that I took this from, so that I have no credits of this. But I do love this because it's so evident in the work environment. Has anyone gone through a change in the work? It doesn't necessarily have to be something very radical, but just any kind of change, a new leadership coming in or a restructuring. Any hands? Yeah, a couple of people, of course, right? We just went through quite a big change in the Netherlands for Cushman and Wakefield, so that's not EMEA-wide, but recently, 2 weeks ago, we went through a restructuring. And I can count all these off in my team. Not in my specific team, I have a wonderful team, but in my broader team, I can. So people start making jokes about the organization, be sarcastic, right? And people actually have a little bit of engagement through that, right? You feel a team because you're all kind of against the company and it kind of feels like you're one team again. But that's the first kind of signal that there's resistance happening. And then it gets worse, right? It starts into excuses, lame excuses. And then you start gossiping. And then it's all still okay there, right? But then at some point, people get mad and angry and they stop communicating. They refuse to be an active part of this change. And that's when it becomes from passive to active, right? And then it goes on to deliberately working against that change. And you know that's corporate politics. Talking to that person, saying, if we don't do this, then that can't happen. And then you go on a strike and you just say, I'm not going to do my work anymore unless I get that job and that restructuring and at that position. And then you are in a war, you leave. And who's kind of who takes the shorter end of the stick there? I don't know if that's an English saying, by the way. But it's the individual that's leaving, because the company is going to go on and change anyways. But it might be your highly talented people that are leaving. So this is a really good line to keep in thought. And if you see people in your teams that are acting this way, then have a conversation with them. So how do you then deal with your executive sponsorship, and how do you deal with your change programs? And there are a lot of tools, and I think Jennifer already mentioned a couple, and then I'm going to mention a couple more in a minute or two. But there are two kind of approaches to this. You can do leadership empowerment, and that's really kind of, it's more of an open structure, and you can do management control. And management control is more a closed structure. In the first case, we are taking our leadership on the journey that we're taking, and we are empowering them with the right tools to make the right choices. So for example, with a middle management group, you will empower them to use the space in the right way and to manage their people in a very different way. But you don't force them into something. When you force people, at least if you force Dutch people, they tend to respond very negatively. So it's an empowerment way. That doesn't always work. It is for large groups, it is a way to kind of embed change management. The other way is management control. And that is where you just say, this is the change that's going to happen, and this is the path that we're going to follow. And I think it aligns with Kay's question that you just had, right? How long are you going to say, like, are you doing okay? How long are we going to do that? Or are we just going to step back and say, this is the change, it's not a big deal, right? I think that's kind of the second approach. And there, you can have a combination of two, but they're very different communication styles and very different change styles that you use. So what are some of the tools that we often use in our change management programs? We use the ProSci toolkit. And one of the things that we do is we work with our executives and we make sure that we have a sponsor. And that's the first step. And that even happens before we've done the change management, because we don't always end up doing change management. It can just be designing a new work environment. Then that's still change management. And then at the front, you need to have your executive sponsorship understand what they're saying yes to. Because often we say, you're going to go to activity-based working. It's going to be awesome. Yeah, and you're going to have all talent's going to be happy. But then you're actually not really having a conversation with your executive sponsor. You're kind of trying to sell something to them, but you're not making them a partner of that decision. So you need to make sure that at that point you have an effective conversation with them, and that you make sure that they realize you have to be on board and you have to be the one communicating this throughout the line. And if we ever have resistance, then you are the final escalation point. You need to be prepared to also step in and actively contribute to this change management process. We use something called a sponsorship diagram. So we go into such detail. We never share this, by the way, with the client itself, but we go into conversations and we understand who all is going to be change resistant. So you really go into quite a lot of detail and you say, okay, well, he's going to be very change resistant. So we're going to have a conversation with him. She might also be change resistant, but she might not have the power to actually affect anything in a change management program. So you start kind of ragging the red, amber, green system on your sponsors and your executive committee, and you understand where do you put your effort into, because you're not going to be able to change everyone, you're not going to be able to guide everyone. So you talk to the people that have the most impact and you make sure that they cascade that down. And then the other aspects that we use is change champions, of course, so that so it's not only top-bottom, but it's also bottom-up. We talk to and empower people leaders. I think that's next to executive sponsorship, it's the most important, because they're managing the teams and they're going to be your eyes and ears. And they also are heavily impacted, because usually for them there's also a lot changing in the environment, while executive sponsors are far more onboarded on what's happening before. And engagement. It's so important to include the people that you're affecting in what you're delivering and what you're setting up, because even if they don't like it, then they were at least involved and they were a part of the conversation and they know why you're heading in a certain direction. And that's also, according to ProSci, it's called ADKAR. It's the personal route to change. Like, you go through certain steps. So you first have to be aware of the change. Then you need to have a personal desire to change, which is always the most difficult one. And then you need the knowledge, the ability, and then you need to reinforce that change. And you need to think about that for all your stakeholder groups in your organization. Make it someone's job. So make sure that someone is dedicated to this change management. It's not something that's going to fly over. And yes, we can try to not give any attention so that they don't cry as a child. And I think that is powerful in some situations, but I think we also, it's not going to fly over. There are a lot of things that you're changing. Like we just seen, the environment is such a cultural barrier that anything that you change is going to have a massive impact. So I'm going to present a little bit of our own situation. I already told you that we're changing quite a bit, but that's more organizational restructuring that we've gone through in the Netherlands only. But we've also gone through an acquisition 2 years ago. We acquired an architect firm in the Netherlands, and it was a firm with about 125 people. And we have an office in Utrecht, and that was an office with about also about 125 people. Of course, any acquisition is muddy, so a couple of people left. Let's say that 220 people were left over. We had 2 offices, Utrecht, Naarden, and we consolidated them. But for us, the biggest motivation to do that was that we had a project management office and we had a group of architects, and they did not collaborate at all. Our work environments were very, especially our former C&W office in Utrecht, was very individualistic. You would come onto a floor and you'd have only open desks. It would be an open environment, but don't be fooled. And not every open environment is a very nice place to work in. And we had like the traditional open office concept where all the articles are about. But it was very individualistically focused and it was tiered, so a lot of layers. So we opened up a new office, which is called our Helix, and it's also called our Living Lab. And the reason I used our own case studies, it's twofold. One, our clients don't like us talking about their messy change programs. And 2, because I think that it's a really powerful case that we did. We have 220 people in this office. I'm going to show you a little bit of what it looks like. But we have, I believe it's 85 workstations. So for 220 people, we have 85 workstations. And we came from a one-to-one desking situation. And what is even more fascinating is that I think where we were just talking about the shift from 67 to 33, individual to individual, pre-COVID now, that's what we did. So we have probably about 35% of individual workstations, and for the rest is collaboration. And you think, well, that's, you guys are in the real estate, so that's easy peasy. But no, it's not, because we have our financial administration department here. We do a lot of finance admin for buildings. And they are very desk focused and behind their laptops all day and on phone calls. So it was actually a really big change program. We had executive sponsorship, but not at all levels. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because there was one executive sponsor that did not sponsor and who was an active resistor and who showed symptoms on the resistance line. And we had to have several talks with him, but what his feelings were cascaded down to his people. So you can see that post-move, that was the group that was heavily impacted by it, while the other groups were taken along by their managers, and you saw that it was far more easy to change. So we did executive sponsorship roadmap. We did middle management trainings, which were very emotional. I always say not everyone can be a change manager if you're in the workplace industry. You have to be very secure, and you have to be able to be emotionally distant. And for your own organization, that's a challenge. But our middle managers were, they were emotional about this because they did lose their parking spot, which was the most emotional part of it, which it always is. I don't know why. People are very married to their parking spots. They lost their parking spots. They lost their individual desks. Some lost their individual offices. And then they came to an office where not only did they not have an individual office, the chance that you would get an individual desk on a day, on some days might be a little bit challenging because we have occupancy rates of 95%, which is extremely high. But we took them along. We made rules of engagement for the space. We talked about, okay, how are we going to use it? What do you need? And we also said, this is what's going to happen. We're not going to have a discussion on it. We're not going to have you say, but this is not going to work, because this is what you're going to get. You're not going to complain for 90 days, and after 90 days you can complain. After 90 days, the #1 complaint was the gender-neutral toilets. There were no complaints about the work environment. None. We did a lot of engagement of our people up front. So we did surveys, we did interviews. It was in a broader future of work program that we did that, not necessarily related to this. But what I love about this is that we also measured our metadata. So we measured what Microsoft told us about how we were actually working. And the most fascinating part is that these networks, if you plot them, I love network charts, and I didn't include them because they're private and we can't show them. They were like this. Network from Naarden, network from Utrecht, very separate. We could see hardly any Microsoft communication between them. We moved, and they consolidated. We see now that they're very tightly knit. There's far more collaboration. We see it in the type of projects that we do. We see it in the communication styles. And that's only because we took our executive sponsorship on board and we trained our middle management how to use this space and why we were using this space. We told them, we want you to collaborate more. That's why we're doing this. If we give you an individual desk, you're not going to look each other up. You're going to be in two separate corners. And now people are all the time in the work cafe, which we call our coffee corner, which is this, and working. And if I go into this office, I get zero work done, that to be honest. But that's not what the aim is of that office. The purpose of that office is to collaborate. While I'm in there, I talk to 1 million people. I love it. I don't go in there every day because then I would get no work done. But I intentionally go and collaborate. I want to close off with this, and then I'll open up for questions. We also did a post-occupancy evaluation. So we did the meta-analysis, which I would advise anyone to do because it's just really fascinating to see how you use Microsoft and how people connect. But we also did a post-occupancy evaluation through our XSF survey. It's a benchmarking tool that we send out to our clients as well, but of course our own portfolio as well. And we have a 90% satisfaction rate. So 90% of our people in Utrecht office were satisfied, not neutral, satisfied. I've never seen a client that high, so I'm really, really proud of that. So even though we have like a sharing ratio of 0.4 desks per person, and people definitely have days that they cannot find a place to sit, there's still 90% satisfaction rate. And I'm sure it would be higher if we didn't have the gender neutral toilets, or if we at least had an alternative to that. On the bottom side, on the left, you can also see that our average utilization rate is 78%, but on the peaks you can see that it climbs up to 95%. That's including signs of life. So from a change management perspective, they do sometimes complain and they come back like, there's not enough desks because I can't find a desk. We have sensors underneath the desks, so we can measure it on a constant basis. Maybe we've hit like the peak twice in the past year. It's not that bad. But if they do, and they do sometimes, I tell them that's fine, but then that doesn't mean that we're placing new desks. That means that we're running a new change management program. Because that signs of life is not what we agreed. We agreed that if you leave your desks for a call or for a meeting, you take your stuff away. So that also enables us to have that conversation again. And then I just compared it to our Amsterdam office, which has a far lower sharing rate. It's probably 0.8 to 1. It also has a lower utilization rate. And you can see that it's a far lower satisfaction rate. I asked Brian, my colleague who runs XSF, how Utrecht scored on the portfolio, and I believe it was number 2 of our entire Cushman portfolio. The only one that scored higher was the Singapore office, which, to be honest, it's amazing. So I can understand that. Fine, we have some goal to still reach, but yeah, that's what I had to say about change management. I hope you guys learned a little bit, and I want to open it up for questions, I guess.
Thank you, Gerda. Lots of data again and a different but related view on change management, using more of the data and metrics and so on. Do we have questions for Gerda? One in the middle of the room there. Get the mic.
Is it on? Yeah, okay.
Hi.
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 Thank you for your presentation. I have a question regarding the, let's say, people leaders or in the company you work with. How do you pinpoint the employees that are the people leaders that you have to get on board in order to change or to help change, I guess? Are they the loudest? Are they the most resistant? Do people talk about them a lot? Like, what are the...
I love that question. I love that question. The reason why I say that is because I'm working on a client in the Netherlands, a logistics company, very traditional. And I asked them for a head count and their teams, and they couldn't give me an answer, and that is 90% of the times that's the case, which is amazing. And the reason I relate that to this is because it should be the people that are managing, like, not like big groups, not managing the managers, but managing the people. And from my perspective, that should be clear, but I agree. Often our clients actually have no clue who their middle management is. That probably says something, though, about how that organization needs to look at their own structure and etc. And the other reason why I love it is because it's not just the people leaders who manage like teams of 10, 15, but it's also the secretaries. It's like they are the knowledge base of the company. They know everyone, they know about what's happening, and they have the biggest spread of network in the company. So I would say that. Does that answer your question? Okay, good.
So the guardians. Guardians of the gateway. Oh, we got another question over the back there. While we're getting the mic, Gerda, you said you got 0 work done when you went in the office. Did you mean that? Did you mean that?
Well, like 0 individual work. Collaborative work is work, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you did say collaboration, not.
Yeah.
But you mean you didn't get much.
I'll sit in a work cafe because I refuse to take a desk when I'm in that office because I need to lead the example.
Yeah.
But then people walk by and they interrupt constantly.
Yeah. But I think we have to recognise that work isn't just being at the desk doing individual tasks.
Yeah.
Work is work.
Yeah.
We're having a good time, hopefully, but it's still work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
The question at the back.
Hello, Katarina from Nil in Ljubljana, North Africa. I have actually 3 questions. First, you mentioned that everyone within the company was involved in this change, also finance, and how did you manage to do it? Secondly, there's a really important health and safety aspect. So with the collaboration aspect and how you should organize your work desk, how does that sort of go together? And when talking about employee experience, I mean, there's a question, if a person needs to think about where he or she will sit, and this is something that bothers him on the way to work, I mean, how did you manage to overcome that? Thanks.
Yeah, okay. The first question was around, no, it wasn't around ergonomics. What was your first question? I'm going to try to do
health and safety.
Fine. Oh yeah, the different groups. How did we engage the different groups? This was a very fast program that we did. It was in the late COVID times. And what we had parallel was a future of work program running in the organization to try to convince our executive sponsorship that we need to work hybridly. So that was kind of a bottom-up approach. But because we were doing that, we were able to link it to this new office, and it was also the way that we actually got executive sponsorship on board. But we did a survey for all our staff, so everybody would feel included. And then we had stakeholder interviews throughout the organization. And we did walkarounds. So because we have a couple of very traditional departments, and they would tell us one thing, and I can tell you that you never like 100% listen to what happens in the stakeholder interview. The best, and I have to say that as an anthropologist, the best is to go in and to have a view. And because it was our own organization, we were able to do that. We were able to kind of be a spy on the wall every now and then, because they would think, oh, she's just sitting there because there's no place in her own department. But then I could see, but you said that you were here all day, but I can see that you're not. Just an example. So that's what we did to engage people. And then in the program afterwards, we still have living lab sessions, so we still incorporate everybody into our living lab principle. Our office is a place where we experiment with all different types of client questions that we have, and we test them. The ergonomics, it's very different per country. So in the Netherlands, we have very strict ergonomic rules, but you only have to do that if you are at an ergonomical workstation. So if you're at a individual workstation, it needs to be ergonomic. So we have 2 screens, we have height adjustable chairs, and we have desks. But we also have a lot of spaces that are not labeled as ergonomical workstations and that are just drop downs, but do have an ergonomical chair and are still very pleasant to work at, but might not have the 2 screens. And the final question?
On the way to work.
Oh, and yeah. We can't guarantee that people have their own desk, and that is an issue. So we do have technology in place to be able to measure, but also to be able to portray to our colleagues that there's always a space available. We have 80 desks, so it's not difficult to find someone. You can just walk around and you'll be able to find it. It costs like 5 minutes of time. But we want there will be a screen where they will be able to see where are the empty spots, because that makes us enables us to use the space more efficiently. But yeah, people had to get used to that, and that was an issue. And that was kind of the instance where we didn't want to give that too much attention, and therefore we had the 90 days without complaining. And then get used to it, and then afterwards, if you still have complaints, we want to listen to you.
90-day moratorium, I think they call it, don't they? Moratorium? You're not allowed to say things during the 90 days, and then...
It's something I took from a project. I did a change program for Uber, and Uber had this like 100 days of no complaining, and they had I had like an Uber term for it.
Let it settle down.
Yeah.
Right, we've run out of time, but again, if you have more questions for Gerda, please bring them to the panel discussion later. Until then, please give her another round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.